Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. It's Open Line First Monday. It's that episode of the month when you are a particularly important part of the program. We always try and dedicate a longer period of time in this program to your questions. To a certain extent, it's open to whatever question you might have about our journey of faith, following Christ, and about the teachings of the Catholic Church, whatever you've been thinking about that maybe you haven't been able to get through in previous weeks. And what I always do for this particular episode is invite someone back who's already been here and shared his journey. My guest tonight is John Barger. He, in fact, a month or so ago, you were supposed to be the guest, and bad weather and bad health kept me away. So I think that night they re-aired the episode.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so the audience is a bit more familiar with your story, but I'm going to have you review it again in a little bit. But John is the founder and president of Sophia Institute Press. So you may have questions about Catholic books and the book world and the state of Catholic bookstores in America, all good questions that we need to be aware of and think about. Maybe the importance of bookstores for outreach and for discipleship. He also will talk in a bit about his journey, but particularly he brought a few books with us tonight, not so much to promote, but because these books touch with his journey of faith. They say, they talk about aspects of what he dealt with in his own spiritual journey. Now remember, again, you're an important part of the program, so the phone number is 1-800-221-9460, or you can send us an email at journeyhome@ewtn.com. John, welcome back to the Journey
Thank you,
Home.
Marcus.
We have to have this excuse to get together. But you know, I know I said it before when you were with me, that the Sophia Press books are wonderful. And it's a great service that you do. And I know it's sometimes a struggle in the publishing industry, but in many ways, Sophia Press rescues some of the best theological books from the non-published stacks and brings them back.
We try to rescue books that rescued me way back when. I've been a Catholic for about 19 years now. Those who saw the show a month ago probably have heard a little bit of what I'm going to say, but I'll say a little bit for those who didn't see it. I grew up in a non-Christian home. Occasionally we joined a Protestant church here or there if it was local, but then we drift away. Went off to college. Primarily I sought for truth when I was a young person. I tried to be good, but I sought mostly for truth, and I never did quite find it. Went to college, studied philosophy at the University of Maryland for a while. This was in the 60s. Things were kind of crazy. And we studied one philosopher, a second philosopher, a third philosopher, a fourth philosopher. We'd look at their ethical systems, and they would contradict each other. And the professors never would take the next step and tell me which one was right or show me how to find out. So I gave up on philosophy. I transferred to a very radical college, Antioch College in Ohio. We had a nude-in against the war one time. People laughed, but the war ended. They had a smoke-in against the war. But the desire to know what was true got lost in the desire for pleasure. So I left there, dropped out in '68, got drafted, was in the military for 4 years, got married to a Catholic woman, and one of the things I want to talk about tonight is this book about Elizabeth Lasser. We'll get to it later on because I was in a position somewhat similar to hers.
I was going to say, the parallel there is very interesting. Not exactly, but it's a significant parallel.
My wife was Catholic. She said the rosary every night. I thought she was nuts. I was a person who drank a lot at the time, still in the military, but still hungering for the truth. You can do both things. And our marriage slowly went south. It took a while, but we would argue about what was true. And since ultimately, those of you who are Catholic know that the church, in fact, holds the truth, she managed to talk me into the church. And it's not that simple. Obviously, there had to be grace in that, too. But it was largely by means of these old books, books by Frank Sheed that were then out of print, books by Chesterton, Belloc, Cardinal Newman, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure. We'd go to used bookstores and scour them to find these books. Right after Vatican II, lots of major American publishers and British English publishers had gone out of business because so many things had changed. We'll talk maybe a little bit later. There's a danger of that happening again right now.
Yeah.
But we found these books in used bookstores, and so I would read them. Chesterton in particular was very helpful. And I came to see that through various means that the church was where I ought to be. And I converted. This was in '74. You can convert intellectually. You can come to see that the universe is as the church claims it is, but you may fail to be spiritually a Christian. Or, and I think the theme tonight for our discussion we talked about a little bit earlier is marriage. In marriage, you can fail to treat your wife as you want to treat your wife. You can understand who God is, you can understand what He calls you to be, but you can carry all your old habits into marriage. And I did that. And as I said earlier, our marriage got worse. We argued a lot about things theological, about whether the salt should be on the left-hand side of the plate or the right-hand side. And essentially, I alienated Susan. We had 4 or 5 kids. We were poor. I was teaching in a Catholic college in New England. Hardly convinced of the truth of faith. So was she, willing to battle each other about
Heartily.
these things.
You said heartily.
Forcefully.
Yes, okay. You know, I was thinking about that even in the Old Testament. If you think about the Old Testament, you could be a child of Abraham. You could be of the covenant. You could have the circumcision. You could accept the law. You could, go to the temple every Friday night. You could do all those things, but not have a conversion of heart.
Yes. Well, I think
It's
that's
a both and. They're both absolutely important.
Well, I didn't have the conversion of heart, and I wound up estranging my wife very much. She was angry at me all the time. She would hardly talk to me. She told me that, I said one time to her, Susan, if you had to do it over again, would you get married? Heck no. It devastated me. I thought, well, sure she would. Things were rough. We had, I think, 6 kids at the time. And then in the middle of the night, she woke me up. She was pregnant, and I took her to the hospital, and she had a miscarriage. And sometimes in late miscarriages, little babies are delivered. And in that particular case, there was a little baby, we named him Christopher, about this big, and I held him in my hand. My father's 85, and he has no hair. And this little baby looked like my father. And I held him in my hand, and I baptized him, and it broke my heart. And it was at that point that I saw that I'm big, I'm 6'6". I was muscular, I was strong-willed, I was domineering, and that I could do nothing at all to save this child's life. And that I couldn't force my wife to love me either. And that I couldn't force my kids to love me either. And that I'd been doing things quite wrong. And so that turned me. I had read the teachings of Saint Therese of Lisieux before, about the little way, and it made perfect logical sense to me. But I'd never incorporated it in my own life. But when I saw that I was helpless in the face of death, and that I couldn't help the innocent child come back, and that I should be dead and the child shouldn't be dead, as I say, it broke my heart, and I did resolve to try to go a different path. I tried to pray more. I'd pay more attention at Mass. I went to Mass more often. And I remembered a book that I'd been given. I've subsequently published it, a book called I Believe in Love, which is retreats based on Therese of Lisieux. I'd been given it at my confirmation in '74, but now we're talking '83. I picked it up again, and I was very conscious of my own badness at that point. And Therese preaches that God's forgiveness is overwhelming. Says that no matter how scarlet your sins are, they're like a drop of water in a huge furnace. God's love is the furnace that just evaporates them. And I tried to be good, and you can't, I guess your soul is a lot like a huge ship. When a ship is going in a certain direction, you don't turn it quickly. Yeah. If a tugboat pushes too hard against it, it punches a hole in it. It doesn't turn the ship. And so I would try to do better but I wouldn't do better. And I had to beg Susan's patience. I said, I know I'm going to be bad again, but can you please be patient? So I was actually reduced to a beggar in a certain sense, but a good beggar. And Susan agreed to be patient with me. And over the course of time, we made our marriage much better. Along the way, we established Sophia Institute Press. I thought I was teaching 9 months of the year, and I thought, well, what can I do in the summer? Well, in '83, almost 20 years ago, I guess it is, I said, we'll reprint some of these books that brought me into the church originally. And I didn't know at all what I was doing. We didn't know about typesetting or finance or editing or anything or marketing. But we did one in my basement, and Susan did the jacket for it. Then we did a second and a third, and we were doing pretty well. I had gone to a friend and said, what do women want? It's a common question. And he said, well, you know, when you come home from work, your wife is there with 2 babies. She's tired. The dog's probably gotten sick on the floor. The washing machine's broken. And she tells you these things, and you can't do much about any of it, but you can listen to her. They just want you to listen to them. So I tried to learn to listen. And I think that was a key changing point in our relationship. So I learned to listen to her. I cared for her. I tried to serve her. And we were doing very well. And then one day in '86, the doctor diagnosed her with terminal cancer, and she was dead in 7 months. And that's pretty hard.
Yeah.
But, and this is the good news, fortunately, she died in July of '87. In '83, little Christopher died. I was given 4 years in which I could change my ways, in which I could pray to learn to be gentle, in which I could pray to learn to listen to her, in which I could try to be kind to the kids. And I was able, by the time Susan died in '87, to become her best friend and to nurse her very, very gently through all of those. And so 2 days before she died, and she was taking lots of morphine and other drugs because she was in such pain. She said to me from a hospital bed, John, you know, maybe if I get out of this, we'll have some babies together. By which I understand the kind of proposal that I'd made it. But I said, you know, and this is how I changed. I said, well, no, you know, Susan, we'll talk about that later. Because even then, I didn't want to push on that. And I think that what this can show us men, and particularly us American men, is that we have to treat our wives differently. That it's one thing to convert to the Catholic faith, but there's a whole way of treating human beings, which is also a Catholic way, which we have to learn. And it's not enough to have the philosophical or theological views, to be in conformity with the Pope. You also have to live in accordance with it. So I think that would be, to the extent that I've had a conversion of heart, an instrument for my conversion was the suffering in my marriage.
When you look at the life of Christ, he gets angry a number of times. And in every single circumstance, if you look at why he's angry, it's almost always because of hardness of heart.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I mean, the only time it doesn't clearly say that is the money changers. But what's going on there? You know, there's no openness of their hearts for the real needs of the people. They're just totally self-centered. But there's another time when he's in the when he's in a synagogue, and a man has a withered hand, and of course the scribes and Pharisees are only there to trick him, and he gets angry because of their hardness of heart.
Yes.
And really what you're talking about, in fact, in your little booklet here, you might want to tell more about that, because in that book you talk, is in the ways in which that hardness of our hearts needs to be softened. And I love that image of a hard heart which is squeezing tightly for ourselves and then opening it to others.
You could be that way without knowing it. Yeah. What Marcus was saying is Susan died in July, and in November I was asked to give a talk to a men's group in New Hampshire, and I gave the talk, and I told the story of my life with Susan and of my interior conversion of heart and the difference it made in my marriage. And afterwards, many of the men there came and asked for copies, and I found out about 6 months later that it had been circulating around New Hampshire. So I wrote it up in a little booklet. At the end of the show, if you want one of these, you can call our 800 number and get one. It's actually been published all over the world, in the Philippines and Guam and stuff. It's good to give to your husband is what it's for, or for a husband to read, because we tend to wear jackboots. One of my mottos was, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And my family experienced the parallel to it. When the tough get going, the going gets tough. They suffered because of my hard-heartedness.
And sometimes we certainly can't see that about ourselves, of course. And you talk about that ship and how hard it is to turn, well, especially to turn ourselves. So we need that grace, but we do need the family. We need people to confront us on our hardness in a loving way. That what's it called? Tough love, in that sense of.
But also to be patient.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing that Susan was finally willing to be, because I stopped shooting my mouth off, stopped yelling, stopped threatening, and convinced her that I really wanted to change. And then she would give me a break. Yeah. We actually had an agreement that if I lost my temper, that I could walk out of the house, go for a walk, and come back an hour or two later. But that did not mean that I'd yield at one point. It was just for me to get my,
get in control.
And it helps. Those little kinds of things can make major progress. Subsequently, I remarried, and I've been married to Eva now for almost 15 years, and we've not had one argument. I don't know anybody can say that. I learned an awful lot there. Yeah. But it has to do with something which comes up in one of these books, The Secret Diary of Elizabeth LeSueur, which is a book we published. Elizabeth LeSueur was a Parisian woman at the turn of the century 100 years ago, upper middle class, who was a very pious woman, but her husband was an atheist doctor, and he hammered her faith repeatedly and tried to bust her out of her faith. And she refused to be goaded into arguments. She redoubled her desire to pray for him. She sacrificed for him. She died also prematurely, like my wife Susan. She died at 48. And when she died, her husband Felix found her diary, which we've published, which told of all of her sacrifices, all of her prayers, all of the times that when she wanted to be home praying, she put on furs and high heels and went out, even though it was contrary to her nature. He found her diary and was so moved by her self-sacrifice that within a year he came back to the church, and within 3 years he became a Dominican priest. Now that's conversion. That's related to the little way of Thérèse of Lisieux. She followed the little way in which you don't confront people directly, and you make sacrifices, and you pray, and you try to reform your own self, and then become a model for people.
Let me read a scripture,
Sure.
and you reflect on what you learned about this in that very well-known Ephesians 5 passage, where it talks about the Christian household. Very often the emphasis is drawn to the text about wives being submissive to their husbands, but the section about husbands is bigger, much, much larger than about wives, which calls us, maybe because we have harder hearts. But what does this mean to you? How do you flesh this out? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
Well, that's pretty clear. Christ died for his church. I think that we should be willing literally to die for our wives, but in every instant to die for our wives. So I have a very difficult business. Selling Catholic books these days is very, very difficult. And we've had continual financial problems since the beginning. We have $100,000 in overdue bills right now. I don't know how I'll pay them. But I leave my office at 5:30, 5:45 at night. I get on my car and I make a practice in the 5 minutes I drive home of shedding all of my concerns about work that I don't want to take into my house. When I step in the door, I still have 6 kids at home, some of whom are little. Eva usually is frustrated, surrounded, flustered, crowded, bothered, having been afflicted by children all day long. And I try always to say to her, Eva, what can I do to help? Even though I want to go in my room, shut the door and be away because I've been on duty all day. And I try to make those little sacrifices all the time. If she says that she wants something, she can have it, so long as it's not illicit. I mean, we can't buy big cars or anything, but if she likes to wear pink and I don't like pink, I say, sure, buy pink, wear pink. To make her happy, I think that we should sacrifice ourselves completely, and there should be an interior sacrifice of ourselves for our wives. And it rolls through to the children, because when you love your wife that way and when you are willing to give anything for her, they see that.
I'd like to mention another verse which I would challenge, especially husbands. Every day we ought to reflect on this verse from Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. If we reflect on that and meditate every day, then we'll more fully understand what it means to love ourselves as Christ did that for us. I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. It's he in me. We take it for granted. It happened at catechism confirmation back then. It's a daily walk, isn't it? I mean, and sadly, I mean, in your case, the boat turning, it took a hurricane to try and turn that boat of your own habits, all the rut. There used to be, someone told me once there was a sign on the Alaskan highway that says, choose your rut carefully, because the rut you'll choose you'll be in for 200 miles. I mean, the rut you had built for yourself, even a conversion, didn't break you out of that for a long time.
My father, when I was young, called me knothead. I'm tempted to call some of my kids that, but I won't. But I think it's one characteristic of me, which the virtue side of it is perseverance. I've persevered through lots of things, but knothead is the bad side of it. And they used to say, how do you get a mule to do something? You hit him between the eyes with a 2x4 to get his attention first. Well, I had to get hit. Yeah. But I recommend to men that you wake up first thing in the morning before your wife does, and sit there for a minute and give your whole life to Christ right then. Just do it. Say, I want nothing today but what you want. And then to your wife. And then get out of bed and bring her a cup of coffee the way I do. I get the kids up and go off. And I'm no saint, but I know that cup of coffee buys me a lot of credit with my wife. And little things like that, where because she's tired or this or that, you say, here, go sleep. I think that if you can learn to give yourself to your wife, you can learn to give yourself better to Christ. And it's not idolatrous. When you marry someone, you give yourself fully to the other person. It's not simply a partnership wherein two people get together to engage in a common activity for certain productive ends. It's a turning toward each other and a giving of self to the other that happens. And that's why, and probably the only reason why you could say that it's like Christ giving himself to the church. Because if it were just a partner, you shouldn't be dying for him.
I once did a study on the heart of Jesus in Scripture, because I was asked to speak on that. And it was about the devotion to the Sacred Heart. And of course, it specifically isn't in Scripture, and I was a new convert, so what's in there? So I studied about Jesus' heart, and I found a number of things. But one thing that fascinated me about this is that when you look at all the circumstances where Jesus reached out to people and his love came forth from his heart to theirs, his love was always conditioned by their needs. The love he gave to the leper was different than the love he gave to the woman caught in adultery or the Pharisees. See what I'm saying? That he was very concerned. And what that taught me, and I'm not a Persane either, and my wife watching knows it, but the reality is that what that taught me was to ask myself, before I lashed out, what is it that she needs from me?
Yes, precisely.
That should temper what I do. Not what I need, but what does she need? What is her heart needing at that time?
And it's at that time, too, because there may be something different tomorrow, which means you have to be attentive.
Right.
And my temptation is to want to come home and look at the newspaper or flip through the mail. Dangerous. You have to give even those things up. But if you do that, you wind up incredibly happy. Incredibly happy.
We're going to take a break in a little bit, and I want to take us off in just a little bit different direction, because we'll take some phone calls and emails when we come back. But you and I were talking about, the publishing world. You know, I have a book, How Firm a Foundation, that we published, and it's had good response. But all the wonderful books you published. But you got to make a comment to the folk at home about the status of the reality of Catholic bookstores. And
I was at dinner this evening with Marcus and Father Benedict Groeschel, and Father Benedict mentioned a 2 or 3 volume work I should reprint, and I'd love to reprint it. And walking over here, Marcus told me of another book I should reprint. Yep. The state of Catholic bookstores right now is desperate. I don't know whether it's the economy, I don't know whether it's the scandals, I don't know what it is, but in the fall, our sales to bookstores declined dramatically, 20-30%. And so did those sales of many other publishers. We called many bookstores and said, "What's up?" And they said, "We love your books. We'd love to buy more of them. But Catholics are not coming in the front door of our stores anymore. We have no walk-in customers. We have to consider after Christmas whether we're going to have to go out of business." And so I ask you, if you're going to buy a book, and you should be doing Catholic reading, a book like this can transform your life. Don't buy it from Amazon. I buy from Amazon all the time. But if it's a Catholic book, go to your local Catholic bookstore. After Vatican II, because many people misunderstood what went on and thought that the church had changed entirely, Catholic books from pre-Vatican II simply stopped selling, and 10, 15 major publishers went out of business because we have to pay our lights.
Yeah.
With whatever the cause is now, the scandals or whatever, maybe disenchantment with things Catholic, if bookstores go down, publishers are going to go down, and we won't have the resources we need 10 years from now to educate your children. So please patronize your Catholic bookstores if you can.
Yeah, and this isn't really, just to make sure you understand, this isn't like some commercial that we pre-planned. The reality is, when you think about all the Journey Home guests for the last 6 years, almost everyone, their journey was at least started or encouraged or because of a Catholic book. Yeah. And I know mine was, and I know a lot of the Sophia Press book, Ignatius Press books, Tan Publishers books. That the other thing that I found helpful to myself on the journey was that there were Catholics who had read the books, who knew what I needed to know, and either gave me the books or lent me the books because they had taken the time to read them first. And so, it's an important apostolate that we need to be involved with.
And books can be out there where there may not be a priest.
Right.
Or they can be there when a priest may not be able to be there. Or they can be there when Marcus may not be able to be there. And they can answer that particular question you have. They're wonderful vehicles. Yeah. But with the internet and so many kinds of entertainment and so many newspapers, they're becoming rarer. So patronize your Catholic bookstores. You can also patronize out. We're giving this away, by the way. If you call the 800 number they're going to show, we'll be happy to send you one of these and a catalog. But we don't really want to push these particular books. We want to...
Well, you're here also to be on the bookmarks with Keck. So you'll also hear John talk about these books in the future. We're going to take a break now, and we'll go back just in a bit with your questions. I know I have an email here waiting and also a couple phone calls. So we'll be back in just a bit. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is John Barger. He is the president, founder of Sophia Institute Press. And I'm sure you've seen some of the books around. And of course, one that I love them so much is because they are books that were tried and true, but have been allowed to go out of print and now are brought back. And they've stood the test of time. We've got a number of emails, so why don't we jump right into it, and then we've got a caller waiting also. In an earlier show, we'll take the email. In an earlier show, you indicated that your children may not have forgiven you. Are you still estranged from any of your children, or have you reconciled? This comes from Susan in Tampa, Florida. Thank you, Susan, for your email.
Well, that's a very good question. I tried to view the show that was showed a month ago, but I lost my tape. And I tried to download it last night and listen to find out what I was talking about last month. And my 4-year-old came and hit the button halfway through. But I must have mentioned that at least 2 of my children, that would have been, I think, in the year 2000, were very angry at me. One of whom essentially would not talk to me. And because she might see this show, I'm going to go carefully here, but it was a very hard problem. It was a problem rooted deeply in who I was and partly in who she was. And the only thing I could do for her, since to address any of the issues directly would create anger, criticism, and a rehashing of things that had been rehashed and rehashed, the only thing I could do was to be silent, to efface myself, to draw back. Whenever she came over, I would just fade. I wouldn't intrude into her conversation at the dinner table. And I did this for 2.5 years. And I'm tall, I run a business, I've got a doctorate in philosophy, and I like to be boss. And that is not at all what I like to do. But I did that, and I did that, and I did that. And now when she comes over, in the last 2 months, she's been hugging me when she leaves. Still, I'm going to probably have to go carefully with her for another 4 or 5 years. I got a phone call a year or so ago from a fellow who said he'd read my pamphlet, Do You Love Me? And he was the headmaster of a Catholic school. You probably know this school, I won't mention it. And he said that he had the same kind of problems with his wife that I had with mine. And that he'd read the pamphlet and he'd been trying for 2 weeks and wasn't getting anywhere. And I laughed. I said, 2 weeks? You're going to have to give it 2 years or 4 years, because it's very easy generally, I think, to win a woman's heart. They're very open. But once you've broken your relationship with her, it's very hard to win her trust back. But the answer about my daughter is, it seems to be working very, very well. And I pray God it will continue.
It seems that your relationship with your daughter, the book that we mentioned here, your own relationship, and what your advice to that man, it kind of points us to this, one of the lost virtues of the 20th century, the virtue of patience.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone so fast, and everything is that it's not just that we can't slow down, but we want it changed now.
One of the worst ways you can wound me is by not talking to me. I don't like to chat. I go away when people chat. I want to know who you are. And to be in the presence of my children, and I have 12 now, and to see them suffering, and not to be able to say to them, just this or just that, if you'd only try that, is excruciating. But as with the case, as with Elizabeth LeSueur, if she had said anything to her husband, it would have provoked more criticism of the church and a hard-heartedness on her part. Sometimes you have to wait for the ultimate reconciliation to be in heaven and not here. You can hope for it here, but you shouldn't expect it. Your job, as Mother Teresa said, is to be faithful, not to be successful. And that's true in human relations too.
Okay. Thanks, John. Let's take this caller. This may touch on really the same what we're discussing here. This is Carlos from Arizona. Hello, what's your question for us tonight, Carlos?
Hi.
Hello,
my
Carlos.
question is for John.
Yes.
And my wife and I have been working with troubled marriages and good marriages and engaged couples, training them for Catholic marriages for the past 25 years in the Catholic Church. And one of the things that we do teach is that it is healthy to argue and fight, provided that they follow rules, to understand that the fight or the argument is not about injury or insulting the other person, but rather to clear the air and to make things better for the couple. And my challenging question to you, John, is that perhaps maybe you're compromising your marriage and settling for peace at any price, the fact that you have not had a single argument in the past 15 years. So it's a little bit of a challenging question for you, and then I'll hang up and wait for your answer.
First, I want to say, Carlos, thank you for your question, and also thank you for your work. I mean, I know, sometimes today with the mess that seems to be out there in psychology and counseling, if people do have marriage problems, where do they go? And so to see men and women faithfully working with couples is a great thing, and thank you for your postulate.
Well, if this is compromise, give me more of it. I'll tell you, I've not been as happy ever in my life as I am with Eva. The problem with saying fight is that things are said in fights. You're stupid, you're fat, you're ugly, you don't know what you're talking about. And especially I found with Susan, later on she would remember those things. In fact, this may help in your counseling. We discovered, Susan and I, once we started talking to each other, that when I would lose my temper, I was liable to say anything, so long as it hurt her. Things I didn't really mean. She, when she was angry, would only finally say what she was really thinking. She'd been pulling her punches up to the point. Now think of the problem this causes. She's finally being frank when we're fighting, and I think she's shooting her mouth off, and so I ignore it when she's finally telling the truth. I'm just being loud and bullying and saying extreme things I don't believe to hurt her, and she thinks I'm finally telling the truth. So we couldn't even see each other because we misread. But apart from that, I don't think it is ever appropriate for me to say things to my wife that hurt her. She's given her life to me. She's cared for my children. She's changed their diapers. She's cared for me when I've been sick. Never should I say anything to hurt her. Compromise, who cares whether we have a pink rug or a red rug or a blue car or a pink car? It doesn't matter. What matters is that I be good to her, it seems to me. And what matters for these people is to be good and to determine what's essential and what's not essential. And what's essential is, of course, the moral law, the teachings of the church, and being good to your wife. Now, maybe there are ways to fight. I mean, certainly if there's a disagreement, you have to work it out, but you can talk about that. But I would never recommend a fight. I understand fights to involve blows, but maybe I misread that.
From your own experience. Well, Ephesians says, be angry, but do not sin.
No.
Be angry, but do not sin. So there's a difference. It can go too far when it goes into hurting. Sometimes it's a fine line to know what that means. But it also said earlier in that same chapter in Ephesians 4, speaking the truth in love. There's the truth, and then there's love. And they're both important. And sometimes we can speak the truth and really hurt people if we're not tempering that with our love.
And I think if you get back to Marcus's point about patience, if you have patience, you don't need to fight. Because most things in marriage don't have to be resolved right now. And if you're patient, you can come to understand what your wife's getting at, and you can change whatever it is that you were doing in order to resolve it.
It seems to me your life is a living out of John 15, the vine and the branches. In other words, the more you grew in your relationship with Christ, He pruned you.
Oh, He pruned me.
So you could produce more fruit. Because you can't produce the fruit of patience and humility unless you're pruned, and the pruning hurts. I mean, that John 15 verses 1 through 11 are very powerful about abiding in Christ, and what that all means in the production of fruit, and that's always in the context of relationships. And
I think having kids helps a lot. Helps a lot too. Having lots of kids helps a lot. If you want to be holy, have lots of kids, because you can't force kids to do what you want them to do. They're hard-headed, and they're capricious and moody, and you have to wait them out. And it's an excellent school of virtue, though I think it's a school that's fewer and fewer people attend these days, especially teenagers. Good school of holiness.
Let's take our next caller. It's Joe from Missouri. Hello, Joe. What's your question for us tonight?
Hi, Marcus.
Hi, Joe.
Just to make it kind of simple here, there's a lot of other factors, but I know that John spoke how his wife was very devout in the faith, and I'm a cradle Catholic. I went through kind of a conversion back home, I guess, but even though I had left the church for a while, spiritual kind of comeback. I'd always been to church and everything like that, but coming back in spiritually, I've experienced a very large conversion. Anyways, seems like I'm the strong one in the faith, and my wife has external influences that kind of keep her from it, and I'm just looking, maybe there's an insight that you know from that you've had with your wife that would maybe shed some light on my subject here. I travel a lot. I'm gone a lot, so I'm not always there to kind of be an influence. Sometimes I pray to be gentler or whatever, and not to point things out all the time. But it's frustrating because I see the joy that I have, because I get to spend a lot of time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and it's like I see a lot more now. But I'm frustrated because I can't show that to my wife, and it just doesn't get across the same way. So if you can shed some light on that, I thank you for your program.
Joe,
I watch as much as I can.
Well, great, Joe. Thank you very much for your call. In fact, the first thing I'm going to say is promise you that you're going to have a bazillion prayers for you and your wife right now, from all who are watching and all of us here, because we are in this together. But I think Joe is also in the military. That's one of the background he comes from. So what's your thought, John?
Well, the show is called The Journey Home, and it is a journey, and people walk at different rates. They have different paths. I don't know your wife. It could be she's going to have to walk a different path than you, and you're just going to have to serve her, assist her in that, by being kind to her in simple, non-controversial things that don't have to do with the faith. Pray for her. Be a very good example of the strengths and the happiness that can come from living as you do. And go along for a while, maybe a year or 2 or 3. I don't know. Obviously, we sitting here in Alabama don't know your particular circumstances, so if there's a good priest that would be particularly good for you to go to them, or to go to him, see what he recommends. But I would say be patient and be good. That's what Elizabeth Lasser did.
Would that book be an encouragement to him?
Yeah, I think this book would be a great encouragement to you. She started praying for her husband. I think they were married in 1890. No, I'm going to get the date wrong. 89, and he didn't convert until a year after her death. But she says repeatedly, I'm going to be better to him. God moves souls. I don't move souls, she says. And the journal, there are 15 years of journal entries here where she says that I love my Felix very much, and I'm so sorrowful that he doesn't share in the benefits of the sacraments or the joys that I have. I feel estranged from him because of this. What will I do? More prayer, more sacrifice, more penance. I'll speak less often about the things that divide us, so that those things that unite us can serve us. But also talk to a priest nearby. And don't despair. Don't despair. He converted after she died. I converted while Susan was alive. Converted this interior conversion. But I was lucky. And I think that grace, given graces. But God's the one who turns hearts. We don't. You had something?
Yeah, I was thinking, John, that of course the prayer is so absolutely important, because it's grace that converts, grace that that cracked through you. You know, I read that verse earlier from Ephesians about husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. I'm going to read the continuation a little bit because it gives us our charge. Because it says, you know, Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. That's what we're to do, husbands, for our wives.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and, you know, loving does not necessarily mean that there's cooperation, because loving is for the other. And so doing all we can that she might experience Christ through us, so that she might be challenged to grow spiritually. I mean, that's our calling.
Earlier you'd said you might ask me what love is.
Yes.
Philosophically, love has two elements, one of which has priority over the other. We're going to stop being technical a minute. The first element of love that's in every single kind of love is the desire to do good for the other person. So when you love your child, you want to do good for him. When you love your country, you want to do good for your country. When you love your neighbor, you want to do good for your neighbor. The second element in love is the desire to be united with the beloved. With your children, you would like your children to be united with you, but you also have to shove them out the door so they can become independent, because that's what's good for them, is their independence. So the desire for union has to take second seat to the desire for good for a person. In the case of your wife, the good you can do for her may have to take priority over being closely united with her for a while. But so long as you're always seeking to do good to her by means of your prayers, taking her a cup of coffee in the morning, bringing her flowers when you return, and showing her that you really care for her, I think that the union between you two will grow.
Just to try and get one more email in here, John, if we can, then thank you very much for that answer. This comes from Thomas in Pennsylvania. My wife and I were married in the Catholic Church, but my wife no longer wants to go to Mass. She comes from a Baptist background and now wants to return to that denomination. I don't want to be too domineering, but how much, quote, influencing can I do regarding her faith without going over the top, in your opinion? Just what about that side of it? What do you think about in terms of the faith side? I mean, let's say we don't have an attacking relationship, but we have one where they're just drifting away from the faith.
I'm not sure about that, Marcus.
Okay.
I was reading a book the other day that was suggested to us for reprinting, and in it the priest writing in the 1940s said that you can never force a conversion, that God wants us to love him freely. We want our children to love us freely, and there's no way to compel it. And I think the same thing would be true with the Catholic Church. The ideal reason for people to go to Mass and to be faithful to the Church is because they see the truth and the beauty and the goodness of it, and they find Christ there. If she doesn't do that, to persuade her by other means may or may not be the best thing. But you have more experience with things Baptist and the appeal of Protestant.
My only thoughts on this, of course, at this point is that the ability to communicate is probably really a big aspect of this, and building those channels of communication.
Yes.
And they're not easy today, because it seems that our marriages are so inundated with so many distractions to communication, and of course, and if we broke down the communication because of fighting, then there are other barriers to hear. And if those barriers to communication are there, then trying to share the faith is not going to be heard for other reasons.
It's going to make it worse.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got to look at that area first, areas of communication. And then, of course, I've said this before on the show, that I believe that one of the best ways to communicate the faith is often, rather than preaching, but inviting the other person to share what they think about the faith, to give them the floor.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the church? What do you really understand about it? What is it? Talk to me about it. You tell me. And
often people misunderstand what the church teaches, and they walk away from things the church doesn't teach at all. And I would walk away too if I thought the church thought that. If your wife has confidence in you, if she sees that you have goodwill toward her, maybe she'll go back to the Baptist for a little bit, but you sustain that goodwill. Don't break it with her. Be there so that if she gets disappointed later on, you're there to give reasons and consolation. You know, and play. I tell you, with my daughter, it's really been probably 3 years of very patient, benevolent waiting. I think you can do that with your wife.
You know, one of the hardest things about us answering these kind of questions on the air is that we're talking about specific situations that can be taken generally. You know, obviously, our encouragement is always to look for local spiritual direction, local priest, a local religious, someone that you can ask his advice and give them more of the details of your specific situation, so they can give you, you know, more concrete encouragement. And
another reason why that's important is because you don't know yourself. When I was being so tough on Susan, I thought I was in the right. I thought this was the way a Catholic husband should bear himself. I was dead wrong. If I had talked to a good priest, and I wasn't going to priest to tell him this, they would have been able to look at me and say, wait a second, John, you're part of the problem. But here on TV, we can't help you see whether there's a part of you that's part of the problem too. So go to your priest. There are good priests out there.
all right, John, you've been back in the church about 25 plus years, and we're both on a journey. Neither of us are perfect, but you've experienced both sides of that conversion of mind, and then the conversion of heart. What have you come to know about Jesus more now as a Catholic, 25 years? Especially, you've been fed by these wonderful books. Talk to us about Jesus in conclusion.
Well, I'm not one of those people who are given experiences of Christ.
You mean great emotional?
I haven't been knocked off any horses. I've been given the grace to persevere. I've been given the sight, the vision of what love is. And when I've asked God for the strength to persevere in what I thought were impossible conditions, such as when Susan was sick and she died, and when we had these great troubles, I was always given that. I've always been given the strength. So my primary experience of Christ is through providence, believe it or not. It's only one small face of him, but that's all that he chooses to give me. But it's a face that's always been there for me to hear. And it's there in your life too. Whoever you are out there, whatever your problems are, God is holding you in his hand like I held that little baby in my hand. That baby didn't know that I baptized him. And God is holding you in his hand, but he loves you with far greater love than that.
And it took you a while to recognize that in the eyes of your wife you were seeing Jesus.
Exactly.
I mean, for the longest time, it was your own blindness that was holding you away from that. John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you for sharing the intimacy of your journey, and also for your work with Sophia Press. You know, our prayers are with you and your encouragement. And
Thank you.
You know, rubber stamp your encouragement to the folk out there to be supporters of their local Catholic bookstore.
Good.
Which means not just Sophia Press, but all the Catholic publishers that are trying to get the truth.
And there are lots of
there.
good ones out there now.
That's right.
Lots of good
it's one of the blessings of today, and why I think we see so many conversions.
Yeah.
Because really, there's lots of good stuff out there. So thank you, John. Appreciate you being
Marcus.
with us. Thank you for joining with us. You know, it's sometimes hard being a husband and a father, and we're talking about marriage. And I know I'm not certainly a perfect husband and father, but in many ways, the reason we open up like this, because we hope that we're encouraging, especially to you husbands and fathers out there that are struggling, trying to be faithful to Christ. I often mention on this program that we're on this journey together, and because prayer is the most important thing we can do for one another, asking God's forgiveness and God's grace and God's guidance, then we must never cease to do that for one another. And so I covet your prayers for Mother Angelica, for the sisters, for EWTN, for all of our work together. But as you and I walk as husbands and fathers, may our wives and our children see Jesus through us, through our words. And God help us when we fail. And God, through his grace, help to pick us up again so we can continue to try and follow Jesus faithfully. God bless. See you again next week.